Thank you, Sherelle. I'm so excited to be part of this symposium. When I was invited, I just was beaming because my mission now is to help families who are dealing with dementia because I did, and I worked very hard as all caregivers do, but I worked hard to learn as much as I could about this disease and to approach it kind of in a different way. As Sherelle mentioned, I was an executive in human resources for 20 plus years at Taco Bell, leading leadership development, organization effectiveness, recognition programs, and parts of HR. And I also would teach executives about breakthrough thinking, creativity, innovation. And then my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I was a little bit in denial, like many of us are, but my sister pushed me. She said, "No, my mom is something is not right with her. Let's get her diagnosed." So we went to one of the best Alzheimer's centers in the country, University of California, Irvine, and she was diagnosed with both Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. And I knew nothing about caregiving. I knew nothing about Alzheimer's or dementia, but I pulled the world, I don't know about world famous, but definitely nationally recognized neurologist aside. And I said, "What's happening here? I mean, how long does she have?" And she said, "Well, I don't really know for sure, but with your mom's both those forms of dementia, plus she has some coronary cardiac issues, I would say 5 or so years to live." And in my head, I was going, "What? She's in her early 70s. Give me a break." So in my head, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to figure out how she can live much, much longer, much happier, and much healthier than that. And so I worked for 9, 10 months and took care of her at the same time. And like many of you experienced, it's too hard to do both. So I went to my boss and I said, "Hey, I have to leave the workplace to take care of my mom. This is a priority." And my boss looked at me like, "Are you kidding? You're in the middle of a hugely successful executive career. You're not old enough for early retirement. But are you sure?" I said, "Yeah, I'm sure." I couldn't be any more sure in my life. And it was the easiest decision in many ways because my mom was just fantastic. I mean, she worked 2 jobs to take and took care of my sister and I beautifully. And so it was a no brainer. I thought, okay, I'm going to leave and do this full time. And as soon as I did, I realized that I have to learn a lot. And dealing with executives, I was used to calling leaders of dementia, big time neurologists. I called everybody, I researched everything, read everything. And I soon, as many of you know, there's no cure for Alzheimer's. We're getting closer, but at that time, there's no cure, and still there's no cure. But I did find out that there are many, 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 many small things that can be done that at least there's some evidence, quote unquote, some evidence that can help them live happier, healthier, longer. And so I thought, why not throw the kitchen sink at it and try all these little things and possibly it could make a difference. And so my mom was a good sport. We got along so great. So she went along with all my crazy ideas, um, from nutrition to supplements to art programs, cognitive programs, physical therapy every week. All these things I tried. And I don't know what caused what, but it worked. My mom lived almost 3 times longer than they thought she would. And she was definitely happy at home. And it was a win-win-win. And she might have even lived longer, but she was a victim of a medical mistake kind of later in the journey, that actually led to her death. So who knows how long she may have lived with all my crazy ideas. But anyway, so after about a year of doing this full time, like many of you have experienced, it's too hard to do by yourself because the dementia disease progresses and it becomes harder and harder. So I realized that I had to get some home care help because I wanted to stay at home, obviously, because I had more influence and leadership capability at home. So thankfully, my dad died very, very young. He was like 55, but some insurance agent said, "Get long-term care for your mom just in case something happens to you, because you're financially responsible for her." I said, "Yeah, sure. Okay. I don't know anything about it, but I did. Best decision I've ever made. Long-term care insurance was a lifesaver to help me pay for all the caregivers." Anyway, so as a leadership executive, I knew how to hire really good people. And so it was kind of a funny story because I also realized that something called a talent pool. If your talent pool is bigger, you're going to have more people to choose from. So most people think of one agency to call. I thought, okay, I'm going to get a bigger talent pool. I'm going to get 5 or 6 agencies sort of on my team to create, more candidates. And so I would call these agencies and they say, we're going to send somebody over. I said, no, no, those, you're not sending anybody over. I'm going to go interview them at the local Starbucks first. And if I like them, I'll give them a trial shift. So I applied a professional interview protocol to the caregiving space, and it worked. I ended up finding some, after, ruling people out, giving them a couple of trial shifts. I learned what good caregiving looked like, what it didn't look like. I made some mistakes, but I figured out what great caregiving looks like. And I hired the most amazing, I call them the big five. The last few years of my mom's life, probably 6 years, she needed full-time care. And so I had 5 full-time caregivers 24/7, and I had the best care team ever. And it was because I knew what I was looking for after I made a few mistakes on hiring. But anyway, so part of my, big learnings and journey is these breakthrough little actions that are important, as well as the leadership element. So I kind of thought of myself as the care leader, not caregiver, especially when I brought in these amazing direct caregivers. But I also thought of it as leading the care team. The extended care team are people like doctors that are so important to your loved one's health and happiness, physical therapists, speech therapy, all the people that came to the house. I had a home dentist. That's the other thing too. People don't realize you can find any kind of resource at home that you can in a facility, because people say, oh, my loved one needs physical therapy, this, they have to go to a facility. No, you can find all these people, and Medicare pays for all these services at home that are medical oriented. They don't pay for haircutters at home and those people, but podiatrists, all those are covered. So that's a learning too, that I want to share. Anyway, so I figured I had to coach these folks. Um, I learned that I had experts on my team that knew more about their specialty than I did, but and caregivers knew more about their specialty. Doctors know more about their specialty, but you are the leader as a care leader to get breakthrough results and get all these actions implemented. I had to be a leader, not just a caregiver. So part of it's mindset of a leader. And in my book, Breakthrough Alzheimer's Care, I talk about the mindset shifts that you have to be a strong, bold care leader and not just a caregiver or an assistant. You have to lead, and there's a lot that goes into leadership, and it's all about mindset. It's you can do this even if you're not a skilled leader, but it takes a mindset shift. It takes an attitude. It takes a few tools and skills that I share in my book, and it worked because I was able to, through my caregivers and through the physicians and doctors, I was able to implement all these ideas. And I figured out they fell into 5 pillars. I call them breakthrough pillars that ended up helping my mom live longer and happier and healthier. So the first one is self-care. Obviously, if you're the care leader and you're depressed, you're a victim, you feel like, it's a burden, you're not going to be a very good care leader. There's a tool I used to teach, called well, 2 tools that are related. One is the accountability ladder. And if you're high on the accountability ladder, that means you're empowered, you're strong, you feel energized. If you're low on the accountability ladder, you're a victim, you're blaming other people. And there's this related concept called the mood elevator. If you're high on the mood elevator, you're positive, you're energized, that's a good thing. If you're low on the mood elevator, you're depressed, you're not going to be an effective leader. So I talk about some of the internal and external drivers of the right kind of internal energizers for care leaders. So internal sources are things like, people call on their faith, they call on their mission, and mine was to help my mom live longer and happier. They call on their background. Lots of internal sources of energy for care leaders, and then there's external sources, which are things like getting some help, exercising, nutrition, socialization. All those things are important external factors of self-care. So self-care is the first pillar. Second pillar is safety, because your loved one is not going to live longer or healthier or happier if they're not safe. So in my book, I talk a lot about, and changing your house to make it safer is not hard and not expensive. I mean, little things like, putting these kids kind of play pads in the bathroom, so if there's a fall, they're not falling on tile. Things like safety rails, a walker, kind of basic things that really make a difference. So that's excuse me, that's number two, safety. Number three is bring on the finest care team ever, because you can't do it alone, and you have to work through others, whether you're in a facility or at home. And I talk a lot about what's the selection protocol for interviewing? What are the expectations of caregivers? What are the expectations you should have about doctors? I share learnings about the key questions to ask a doctor, how to slow down a speedster doctor, because a lot of doctors kind of whip through there, and how do you slow them down, and why that's important. Key questions to ask if your loved one has dementia, whether they're a neurologist or other specialist. So managing the care team, how to coach them, and you don't have to be an expert in the field to execute good coaching protocol. So I talk about coaching as a way to take good caregivers or good doctors or other experts and make them greater for you. And that's the coaching model. And I share a number of actual coaching interviews and so forth. So that's number three. Number four is kind of a catch-all category: nutrition, supplements, exercise, art programs. Is kind of a sort of the to-dos around these small care actions that make a big difference. And there's lots of them. And I talk about that in my book. And then last but not least is the environment, because to create an amazing physical environment and an amazing people environment is very important for dementia patients. So I learned this from a project I did at Taco Bell, where I worked with the head of marketing, and we had 15 experimental stores in Tucson where a consultant taught us about touch points. And so touch points are, what does somebody see, experience, feel, think as they walk into a retail place like a Taco Bell? What do they experience when they're there? What do they experience as a leftover thought later? And so I thought about my mom's care that way too. It's okay. Every touch point, every minute, week, hour, week is a touch point for her, both safety touch point and a happiness, security, comfort touch point. So I tried to surround her world with all the things she loved. My mom was a kindergarten teacher forever, and so she loved kids. So I would put stuffed animals around her room. We would hang stuffed animals and pictures from her walker when she'd walk around, and we'd go out every single day on an adventure with a walker or wheelchair, and kids would surround her and want to touch the stuffed animals. And so she would like beam, her face would just beam with happiness when she'd see these kids around, and how they were talking to her, even though she lost her speech. One of her earliest signs was losing her speech, but you could tell she was happy to see these kids and be around them, and them rave about my mom and the fun wheelchair. And so that's an example of physical environment. She loved art. She would draw, which is great for dementia patients, by the way. We'd put her pictures all around the house, and you could see her just be so happy that we love her, and we love the we love the and so proud of her work. And so she'd see that. And then the people environment is, don't let anyone come in contact with your loved one that doesn't support fun, love, happiness, safety, and familiarity, because those are important security and happiness things. And if somebody's grumpy or short with somebody, whether it's a caregiver or a physical therapist or anybody that has contact with their friends, fire them, get rid of them, because you want 24/7, all touch points, physical and people, to support and surround sound with love, compassion, care, fun, familiarity. And if they're not, you as a care leader have to manage that environment for your loved one. That's what leads to happiness, and health and longevity are connected. We know that there's a lot of connection between body health and brain health, but there's also a lot of connection between happiness and brain support and health and physical support. So those things are all related. So you're the kind of environmental protector, if you will, of your loved one, and that's one of your roles as care leader. So all these five pillars are critical for this belief in long-term health, long-term longevity, and happiness. And happiness is kind of the linchpin to all this thing. If your loved one isn't happy or safe, these things aren't going to happen. So my thought was, my role was care leader to implement all these things, small actions, and provide my leadership to make them happen. And so it's so funny, after my mom passed with this medical crazy mistake, which is another whole thing. how do you help caregivers? I mean, help family members who are victims of of medical mistakes, which, by the way, is a lot more common than people know. That's for another topic. But anyway, so after my mom passed, I was connected with the director at UC Irvine's Alzheimer's Center, and I was telling her my mom passed, and she was asking me about it. And I told her some of the ideas that I had and how I was using my leadership background to implement all these ideas. And she said, "You got some amazing ideas, Mark. Why don't you go on our podcast series and do a couple podcasts?" So this is like soon after my mom passed in 22, 23, that I did a couple of these podcasts, and people came out of the woodwork and they said, "Oh my gosh, you've got some amazing ideas. I've never heard these things, and how you apply leadership. And I love the tools you talk about, leadership tools." And they said, "You should write a book about it." So I thought, "Oh my God, how am I going to write a book? I don't know how to write a book." But I sat down the next day and took some notes. The next day, a couple more notes. And 8 months later, I had a draft of a book. And then I found a traditional publisher, which was harder than I thought. But anyway, my book just came out 3 weeks ago, and it kind of combines the leadership aspect with all the tools to be a good care leader, and all the mindsets and perspective shifts. And then, of course, all the breakthrough actions that led to longevity and happiness are all in the book, too. So I couldn't be more excited to be here. I'm also passionate about helping families in many other ways. I lead several Alzheimer's support groups for the Alzheimer's Association. I do fundraising. Sherelle mentioned I go to Washington and advocate for funding research, which is another interesting in this environment, a little bit tough. But I do that anyway because that's important. And I also coach high school kids. I have a program right now I'm leading with as a pilot for Orange County Alzheimer's Association called Brilliant Minds, where high schoolers get together and they do fundraising and community education. I'm one of the mentors for a bunch of these teams, which is interesting because I don't have any high schoolers, but I'm learning I'm learning a lot about high school slang, which is kind of fun. So anyway, I do lots of things, and this is an important topic for me. So I couldn't be more excited to be part of it, and hope you enjoy the rest of the symposium. I was happy to be here. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it. Appreciate you. I appreciate Cheryl and all the other speakers today. Thank you.